Hey everyone, today on the bench I have the amazing E-flite 64mm A-10 Warthog. Yes, the Thunderbolt 2, affectionately known as the Warthog or the Hog. And this model from E-flite, I tell you, is absolutely amazing in person. The quality of the foam finish, the attention to detail, the panel lines, the rivets, everything on this aircraft, it really is one of the best foam airplanes I think I have ever seen. Really, every time I look at it, I'm just more and more and more impressed with it. From the factory, it comes with what's known as the flipper scheme, which is this camouflage that you see here with the three different types of gray. And from what I can tell, this particular combination of colors was really never used like in combat or really any type of a long-term deployment. It was almost like an experimental camouflage that was applied on the aircraft. One advantage of this scheme is that it does break the airplane up a little bit from like what I consider the current U.S. Air Force low visibility paint scheme, which is just light ghost gray and dark ghost gray with the false canopy underneath. And that scheme is extremely effective against basically ground attacks. So it makes it more difficult for AAA batteries on the ground, small arms fire, anyone on the ground tracking the airplane to really identify the direction of the aircraft and the silhouette of it, which is really a bad thing if you are flying an RC plane, and of course you're going to be situated on the ground looking up at the airplane. So this flipper scheme, which has the three combinations of gray, is a little bit better in terms of visibility than the actual gray scheme that is used on the current U.S. Air Force A-10s and of course Air Force Reserve Air National Guard as well. But when I looked at the scheme, I knew that there was opportunity here to do something a little different. And just like a lot of the other things on the aircraft, it was just almost a blank canvas, just waiting to have something else done to. It does come with a number of weapons from the factory as well. It comes with 4 AIM-9 Sidewinder type missiles on the outer edges here, some Mavericks, some 2 3/4 inch rocket pods, and some sort of probably like a 1,000 or 2,000 pound bomb underneath. But not necessarily going to win you any points in terms of scale accuracy in the loadout or how the weapons look. So once again, a little bit of an opportunity there to make some improvements. And so going into this aircraft with kind of my list of what I want to do differently, something maybe a little different with the paint scheme, something a little bit different with the weapons. I started my homework, and this is what I came up with. Ta-da! Here it is. So like I said, totally different A-10 than what I started with. As you can see, the flipper paint scheme is no more. The aircraft has been completely repainted. So I had a couple prerequisites in order to do this, and I had a lot of different schemes in mind when I set out to do this. I needed the aircraft to be visible in the air. I needed something that was going to provide a good amount of visibility and orientation in the air. And I knew that the standard U.S. Air Force scheme, that light and dark ghost gray with the false canopy underneath, is extremely effective at camouflaging the aircraft and making it difficult on the ground to know which way the aircraft is pointing. So that instantly was a no-go in terms of what's the best scheme for an RC pilot, because we fly from the ground, looking up at the aircraft. So if it works well to hide the aircraft for ground forces, it's going to work very well in hiding the airplane for an RC pilot who flies from the ground. So instantly I had to cross that one off the list. So that started leading me down a path of saying, well, I could go with the Desert Storm scheme, which was a Euro 1 paint scheme, which is 2 different shades of green and dark gray. And that was, of course, used in the 1980s and early 90s. And throughout the Gulf War. And that scheme, I think, had a lot of promise in the sense that it was really designed to camouflage the aircraft from above. They were obviously worried about Russian fighters intercepting an A-10 from the air and wanted to camouflage it against the woodland European kind of landscape. So that one had some possibilities, but then again, it's the same color scheme top and bottom, and that can make it difficult, especially in some weird lighting conditions, to know which way the aircraft is pointing. So then I began looking at what is known as like the heritage schemes. And for whatever reason, the A-10 wears heritage schemes better than any other modern airplane I have ever seen. And one of the things I look at doing here is saying, all right, well, how can I take one of those heritage schemes and apply it to my A-10 and make it something a little bit unique? And I went back and forth between the current A-10 demo team squadron, which has the it's painted up to almost like a P-51 Mustang, where it is green on the top, gray on the sides and bottom, and does have some invasion stripes in it. But if I was going to go down that path, why not pick one from the hometown squadron? And so that's what I did. I picked the 127th wing out of Selfridge Air National Guard Base in Detroit, Michigan. And those guys fly the Red Devils A-10s, and they happen to have a very awesome heritage scheme that had the invasion stripes. It was painted in olive drab and neutral gray, so it had that classic World War II look. The D-Day stripes were applied because the aircraft actually flew in the D-Day anniversary ceremony over Normandy, France, in just a few years ago. And also it took place in, when it was over there, it actually loaded up some inert armament and took part in some sort of a training exercise in which they used roads in, I think, Estonia, actually, public roads in Estonia to operate from, as well as using some old abandoned airstrips and some other things like that in order to see how well the A-10 could perform in kind of those combat conditions in which there is no real airport ready for them. So the aircraft has a little bit of history there as well. And it's also a veteran of, I believe, the Afghanistan. This particular airframe fought in Afghanistan and maybe even possibly in Iraq, but Afghanistan for sure. So it's a combat-proven aircraft. It's been repainted. It has some D-Day history to it. It has a really cool heritage scheme, and it's from Michigan. So it by far was an absolute win for me to pick this paint scheme. And I think with the invasion stripes and this color combination, it's gray on the bottom, it's got the green on the top. I think it's going to be a really great combination to see from the ground as well. Now, I took some artistic liberties here. So this scheme was actually done up for the centennial of Selfridge Air National Guard Base. So it said 100 years on the engine nacelles, and I replaced that with the Red Devils logo. It also had a gigantic Red Devil here along the fuselage, and I decided to go without that. And part of the reason is it's extremely difficult to get a vinyl decal of that size to lay down on the airframe here with the it's got little scoops here and there. We got the panel lines, we got the rivets. It would have been almost impossible for me to get that decal to lay down properly and look good. Plus, I thought it looked maybe a little bit over the top to have that gigantic Red Devil on the fuselage. So I skipped the Red Devil on the fuselage, and instead I actually added the shark teeth up on the front, which, yeah, I know that's not correct. The shark teeth belong to the 23rd Tactical Fighter Wing during Desert Storm, and I decided that, yeah, while it is not historically accurate, and I'm probably going to catch some flack over putting teeth on my A-10, I really don't care. And I think I did it to pay homage to the 23rd Tactical Fighter Wing that flew in Desert Storm. I wanted to include some sort of a Desert Storm element to the aircraft, and I figured adding the teeth on the front of it would do that. Plus, teeth on an A-10, they look awesome. So, yeah, I know it's not correct, and I know it kind of contrasts with the invasion stripes, but you know what? At the end of the day, I'm like, it's still my airplane, and that's what I wanted to do to it. So that's why the teeth are on there, even though it's not correct, and that's why the Red Devil here on the fuselage is also removed. You'll notice that there's quite a bit of differences in scale details and the armament. The armament's been completely redone from what the factory installed. I went ahead and 3D printed all sorts of new stuff for it, and I'll start right out here at the end of the wing here. It's got two 3D printed AIM-9 sidewinders with dual launching rail. While sidewinders really aren't used that much on the A-10s anymore, I did want to add them because I think they look kind of cool, and B, they added some extra contrast to the aircraft. I painted them white with the black nose on there, and I think that just helps bring a little bit more contrast to the aircraft, making it a little bit easier to see. and they stick out a little bit further as well. So it helps with a little bit of orientation. Even though they're not really used anymore, they were used quite a bit during Desert Storm. So it's a little bit of a throwback to the Desert Storm theme that I wanted to include in the aircraft a little bit by putting those AIM-9 sidewinders on there. Next, I have the 2 3/4 inch rocket pods. Those are actually used in a current loadout. However, they typically only maybe run one pod, and then on the other side they use a Lantern targeting pod instead. But unfortunately, I didn't 3D print a Lantern pod, so I just have 2 of the rocket pods on here as well. But I completely redid those as well. I cut them apart. I redid the what used to be a decal on the front of the rocket pod has been cut off, and the rear has been cut off, and then I 3D printed all new leading edge and trailing edge of those pods as well, with little rocket tips sticking out of the front of them. So it adds a lot more 3D detail than was there before. It was just a decal, and now it's actually got some depth to it. Next, I went with the one of the A-10's probably favorite weapons to use, and that is the AGM-65 Maverick missiles. I have 2 Maverick missiles on here, one on each side. They would typically carry more than that, but that's actually becoming a more common layout for the aircraft. Now, during the Gulf War, they would fly with more Maverick missiles, Mark 82s, and cluster bombs, but those really aren't used much anymore. So, but I did want to include the Mavericks on here. I did redo the entire Maverick missile. I created a launcher rail for it. I actually included a little rail that went on the Maverick that you could slide it on and off, but it didn't quite pan out the way I wanted to, so they're actually just glued into place. And then I painted them gray in the front and olive drab on the back. And that's not that uncommon of a combination of the Maverick missile. It's in fact right now I think it's pretty common that any combination of seeker head and body are possible. Either they can be white, they can be gray, they can be olive drab, and they can be any combination thereof as they move different heads on there. There's an infrared seeking head, there's a television seeking head, and there's a laser seeking head that can all be used on here. And each one of them has a little bit different color scheme too, and a little bit different head. In fact, during Desert Storm, some of the A-10s were actually assigned to fly night operations, and there's no night vision capability in the A-10. There's no radar, there's no night vision, there's nothing like that, there's no forward-looking infrared. So what the pilots did is they actually used the infrared from their Maverick missiles, and that would display on a small screen on the cockpit, and it allowed just for a few degrees of side to side, and I think like a couple degrees down is about all the visibility they had. So they said basically it's like trying to fly through a drinking straw to find the enemy targets, but it worked. And as soon as the missile was launched, they would lose the feed, but they could go out and find enemy tanks and armor in the desert using nothing more than the camera that was inside the Maverick missile. Moving to the next pod here, we have 2 new gravity freefall bombs. Those are Mark 84 2,000 pound gravity bombs there, but they're painted up a little bit closer to a JDAM, in which they are olive drab on the front half, and then they have the fins in the back that are gray. I didn't get a chance to 3D print kind of that case that sits around the bomb to make it into a JDAM. I had a little trouble making that shape in CAD. I'm a little rusty in CAD without designing things in many years now. So, but that covers the armament on this side. This side over here, it's an exact twin, except for instead of AIM-9 sidewinders on the far end, it's got a ECM countermeasure pod on there as well. And there are just a couple pods that they would have used, but it really depends on the type of mission whether or not they'd be needed or not. It's actually pretty common, like in Syria, Afghanistan, and Iraq, that they really wouldn't have to run an ECM pod or the AIM-9 sidewinders because there was no air-to-air threat, and you really don't have a very sophisticated ground radar system that's going to pick up the A-10. Obviously, this thing is not very stealthy at all. So this would probably be replaced by a Lantern pod, where one of the rockets are, and then the outer pylons may include a 500-pound laser-guided bomb. This is the A-10 C model. You can see this is a C model because it's got the new GPS antennas on the top here, as well as a countermeasure system built in behind the engine. But it does still maintain the paved penny pod, which is a little bit of a inaccuracy in the model, but For me, being a fan of Desert Storm, I like the paved penny pot on there, so I went ahead and left it on there. So it does have the paved penny pot on this model, even though current A10s don't really fly with that anymore. A few other scale details. In this area right here, there is a kind of a slat that is adjustable, and that's to help with airflow over the wings and around the engines here at low speed. And there's these little like catch fences on the side of those slats. Now the slat is not actually on here, but I did 3D print a kind of a fence area that normally would have been where the slat would have formed or would have rode up and down on. So I created that. I also added the antennas to the back here that sit underneath the engine. I just kind of made a silhouette of those and 3D printed them. And then it's also got some additional antennas up in the nose. So there's a couple little scale details here and there. The pitot tube as well. The pitot tube is actually a leftover one from a Corsair model that I had. And a lot of times it's just a matter of robbing the parts bin and seeing what I can find laying around to kind of give the aircraft a little bit more scale fidelity. It's incredible from the factory, don't get me wrong, but I always like to just kind of ratchet it up a little bit more and try to make it more of a flying scale model. So that's what I did with a lot of these 3D printed scale details. Otherwise, a few of the other modifications that I did to my A10, obviously besides the paint and the 3D printed weapons and details here, is on the nose landing gear. I actually angled the nose landing gear forward a few degrees. I added washers on the back of the retract housing, which tipped the entire thing forward. And the reason I did that is a lot of the force on the landing gear, especially on landing or takeoff, is actually a horizontal force. It's actually drag on the wheel trying to pull that gear backwards. So what I ended up doing is just kind of angling that forward a little bit. And my intention is to take some of that the horizontal force and kind of transfer that into the strut where that spring is, that compression spring. With it straight up and down, it really only can deal with vertical loading. And by angling it forward a little bit, I hope to transfer just a little bit of that horizontal load into the strut. And then I well lubricated the strut and spring and everything, so that actually moves very freely now. And then I used a Dubro shock absorbing front tire on here as well. Just anything I can do to help try to take some of the load off the landing gear. I will be operating this off a mixed field. It has we have a fabric runway that's only about 15 feet wide, which is probably like landing an A-10 on an aircraft carrier with how wide it is. It's a little narrow and, well, I don't hit it all the time, let's say that. So I have to plan on the fact that the aircraft will be actually operating on and off grass as well. So, and knowing that I wanted to make that front landing gear just a little bit more robust, I added a little bit of a rake angle to the front there and then changed the tire to more of a shock absorbing tire. So any loading that comes through the front gear strut should hopefully help with absorption with that angle and the softer tire. But otherwise, it was a very fun project. I took months and months and months worth of research to try to figure out what scheme I wanted. I ended up, like I said, mixing a couple different paint schemes together to come up with this one. So it's not historically accurate, but it's my own take on it. And you know, that's usually what I ended up doing anyway. I do a lot of studying and then I pick a little bits of elements and then I kind of combine them the best I can. The graphics all came from Callie. She did a fantastic job dealing with all my many changes along the way as I picked and chose different things and hunted and pecked around the internet to try to find all the correct logos and everything that would go on here, and then also come up with some of my own as well. So she did a fantastic job making, it's really kind of a fantasy heritage scheme on my A10. But overall, I'm really happy with how this one turned out. I used Testor's olive drab because the actual A10, the heritage one here, has more of a brown-ish tint to the olive drab, and some of the other aircraft have more of a greenish tint. And the Testor's Model Master olive drab has that brown tint that I was looking for. Unfortunately, that paint color had been discontinued, and I scoured the internet, hobby shops, all over the state, anywhere I could try to find that paint, and bought up as much of it as I could. And so the upper surfaces have been sprayed with Testor's. I used the Rustoleum 2X black and white on the invasion stripes. And for the gray, I tried something totally different. I used latex paint. I actually took light ghost gray and neutral gray down to my local Home Depot and have them mix me up some paints. And then I could play around with what color fit the best for what I was looking for here, and I actually brushed it on. And then in order to get the kind of that fuzzy demarcation line around the green and the gray, I cut mask out of tracing paper and taped that on there, and then shot the aerosol over it, and that gave me just a little bit of a fuzzy line in there for that demarcation. So I think overall it came out pretty good. I'm very happy with how the airplane turned out. The next step for me is really to go get this thing, go get it in the air, and I'm really happy with how this one came together. So if you guys got any questions at all on the E-flite 64mm A-10, the products I used, what I did to make this paint scheme the way it is, by all means leave them in your comments below. I'm always happy to help out. And but yeah, that pretty much wraps up my overview of my 64mm E-flite A-10, the Thunderbolt 2, the Warthog. My own custom heritage scheme on this guy. So now it's time to go get this one in the air.